What's going on, guys? Kaiser here from keyserreveal, and today we'll be taking a look at the video features on the Nikon D850. With that said, let's get to it.
You know I never will make it by, and I can't breathe if it isn't you and I won't make it without you by my side. I can walk, can't stand, can't talk, can't fly without you. I'm so lost without you.
Alright, so this is a full frame camera with a 45.7 megapixel CMOS sensor. It can shoot up to 4K 30 frames per second without a crop, and 1080p 120 frames per second with a crop. Now in terms of video features, you're definitely not going to find as many in this camera as you wouldn't say a GH5 or a camera heavily focused in video, and that's because this camera's main purpose is photography. Now you do get some of the more basic features like image stabilization, focus peaking, and zebra stripes, but on the flip side of that, you can only use the image stabilization and focus peaking in 1080, and you can't use them both at the same time, nor can you use zebra stripes and focus peaking at the same time. Now I'm not exactly sure why this is, but I definitely think that this processor could handle that. But if I had to take a guess, I bet that this was more strategic for any future video focused cameras that Nikon might release. As far as image stabilization, this camera uses electronic VR. Now if IS is high on your list of priorities, then I don't think that this is a good choice. I tried the in-body electronic VR by itself and with the VR on my lens and really didn't notice much of a difference. In terms of continuous autofocus, not much has changed from previous Nikon cameras. You still get this pulsing kind of hunting motion that makes the footage pretty much unusable. Now for me, I never use continuous autofocus for video, so this really isn't a big deal. But if you're someone that does a lot of vlogging or anything that relies on it, this could definitely be a problem. Now this is a full frame camera, so it performs pretty well in low light situations. It can shoot up to 25,600 ISO, although I wouldn't recommend shooting that high. But here's a look at some tests. Now there are other cameras out there that are better, yeah, but then you have to decide how likely you are to shoot in these extreme low light conditions that require you to crank your ISO up this high. Because at the end of the day, the best low light camera in low light conditions will never outperform a camera in an ideal lighting situation. Now one of the things that I like about this camera is its ability to shoot at ISO 64, which can also be expanded down to 32, because shooting at these lower ISOs will always give you the cleanest footage possible. Now this camera retains its standard profiles like neutral, vivid, and flat, but you also have the option to install custom presets. So I'll leave a link below just in case you guys want to check that out. The screen on the Nikon D850 is pretty much like the screen from the D500. It's a touch screen, you can tap to focus, and it tilts up and down. However, it doesn't fully articulate like the screen on the GH5. In terms of the menu and button layout, this is probably the most intuitive one that I've used so far. Basically, every setting that you need is represented with a dedicated button or is paired with one that actually makes sense. Alright, so I actually sold my GH5 for this camera, and I know with the lack of video features it sounds like a bad idea, but for me, I shoot a lot of photography stuff, so I wanted a camera that can handle both. And on the video side, I had a really short list of things that were important to me, such as 4K without crop, true slow-mo, and a full HDMI. Now I know a full HDMI sounds frivolous, but I actually had a mini on my D500 and it was a pain. Now all of the features that the GH5 offer are great, especially for the price, but they either didn't work well for me or I simply didn't use them. For example, the image stabilization is great, but I never shoot handheld. Also, it appears that the issues with the continuous autofocus have been resolved. But once again, I never use continuous autofocus for video. Now I can say that I benefited from the articulating screen and some of the video features like 4K focus peaking, waveform, and vector scope. But because I always felt like that screen was a bit too small, I was going to pick up an external monitor anyway, which will give me those same features and allow me to record to an external SSD. But another reason why I switched cameras is because of vlog. Now every once in a while I will get these green splotches in my video. Now it didn't occur enough for me to not recommend this camera, but whenever it did happen, it certainly was a pain. But ultimately, the deciding factor for me was when I realized that I was trying to grade my log footage to look like the footage from my Nikon D500. Now I know this sounds weird because whenever you mention color science, everyone thinks of Canon. But for me, I actually prefer the more natural colors from the Nikon, but that's just my personal preference. Which leads me back to the initial question, are Nikon cameras any good for video? Well, that depends on what you prefer and what you need from a camera. For me, it doesn't check the box of every feature that I need, but it definitely checks off enough to create good video. But I'm curious to know what you guys think, so leave a comment below. And as always, if you guys enjoy this content, be sure to hit that like button and definitely subscribe. So until next time, peace.